In the world forged by ice and fire, rarely did second chances present themselves. Failure, especially at the highest castes of society, was a cutthroat condemnation. At the very best, one could only hope for exile. But for the select few, those who were granted that option of deliverance, the slim possibility of redemption remained. Yet, the situation of one former Hand of the King was so improbable, it appeared destined to occur. This man was Jon Connington. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Exploring Fiction. A Targaryen loyalist through and through, Jon Connington was exiled by his own king, and could only watch from afar with guilt flowing through his veins as a new regime rose from the fire and dust. But rather than succumbing to death, he subsisted. The former Lord of Griffin's Roost lived to see the day when he would receive a chance to right his wrongs vicariously through Young Griff, the rumored Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar. Jon Connington marched toward his looming demise. But though his departure from the world was nigh, he received an opportunity to repay those he loved and served through conquest and mentorship. He became the living embodiment of a second chance. So, who exactly is Jon Connington, and why is he such an interesting character? Let's explore. Jon Connington was born to Lord Armand Connington and his wife at Griffin's Roost in the year 260 or 261 AC. He was their only child. Jon quickly took a liking to Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, as the two squired together in King's Landing, and then the former became the attendant for the latter. It was widely known that Jon was Rhaegar's greatest friend in their youth. As he eventually returned home, Jon was named Lord of Griffin's Roost after the passing of his father, and he kept up his loyal service to the crown just as Lord Armand had done. However, unlike his father, Jon was soon beckoned back to King's Landing. He named his cousin Ronald Castellan of Griffin's Roost, and set off immediately, and notably attended the wedding of Rhaegar and Elia Martell during his time before the encroaching uprising. As the reckoning of Robert's rebellion began, Jon was in the eye of the storm, and when King Aerys Targaryen II dismissed his former hand under the suspicion of being a traitor, he sought instead someone with youth and vigor to occupy the position. He decided on Jon Connington. While some thought him too wild and inexperienced, Jon embraced his new role as the war blossomed across the Seven Kingdoms. However, the naysayers of the Lord of Griffin's Roost may have been more correct than they feared, for Jon promised the king the head of Robert Baratheon the Usurper, and so led the loyalist forces into the field himself. He even took the pursuit of Robert across the Riverlands into his own hands, and followed him to Stony Sept. Jon threatened and bribed the locals for the whereabouts of the usurper, but the Lord of Storm's End eluded him. Much to his fury, Jon could not pry anything from the lowborn surrounding him. Doom was written across the steps of Stony Sept for Jon Connington. Before he could locate Robert Baratheon, the rebels' allies arrived with reinforcements in the forms of Eddard Stark, Hoster Tully, and their men, and they forcibly routed Jon and his own army. In the fray, Jon killed the heir to the Vale, Sir Dennis Arryn, and also wounded the Lord of Riverrun. But even that was not enough to stay defeat. Robert Baratheon, now out of hiding with the arrival of backup, almost killed Jon, who retreated with great shame after he realized the Battle of the Bells was indeed lost. The king, already paranoid and temperamental, was at his wits' end. Aerys II held Jon personally responsible for the shameful defeat, and exiled him and stripped him of all lands and titles. Soon, the king succumbed to the blade of Jaime Lannister in King's Landing, and Rhaegar lost his life in combat with Robert Baratheon. And Jon Connington was a world away across the sea. He held himself personally responsible for the death of his greatest friend and his king. For if he had done his duty at Stony Sept and killed the usurper, none of the horrific events afterward would have ever come to pass. After Robert ascended to the throne, he spared no leniency for House Connington. He stripped them of their lordship, refused to recall Jon from exile, and kept the majority of their land and coin for the crown. Jon, meanwhile, forged a new life for himself across the narrow sea, though it was still a life of the sword. He joined the Golden Company, rising all the way to serve as the right hand to its leader, Sir Myles Toyne. 5 years after he first began to bear the Golden Standard, Jon, along with Sir Myles, was heralded by Magister Illyrio Mopatis and Varys, who laid forth a proposition. They claimed Aegon, the infant son of Jon's dear friend Rhaegar, had survived the sack of King's Landing despite the rumor of his desecration at the hands of the Mountain. Knowing where Jon's loyalties lie, even after Rhaegar's death, Illyrio and Varys believed he was best suited to take care of the swaddled infant. But in order to do so with the utmost effectiveness, Lord Connington would have to abandon the Golden Company, and the only way to do so without raising suspicion was to create a false story of disgrace. And so, a rumor was spread that Jon had attempted to steal from the company's war chest, and to his chagrin, it caught on far and wide. Out of the entire Golden Company, only he and Sir Myles Toyne knew the truth, and most in and out of the Brotherhood believed he drank himself to death in liss. Instead, Jon adopted the identity of Griff, raising Aegon, or Young Griff, as a son for 12 forsaken years. Throughout the early entries in A Song of Ice and Fire, Jon Connington is mentioned in passing on various occasions. In A Dance with Dragons, however, it is clear his story is only beginning to unfold. Tyrion Lannister, having rid the world of his father, and thus making many dangerous enemies in the process, now seeks the Mother of Dragons as he flees a fugitive from Westeros. With aid from Magister Illyrio, Tyrion is placed aboard the ship the Shy Maid, upon which sails Jon Connington and Aegon as Griff and Young Griff. Illyrio informs only Jon of Tyrion's identity, and they set off for Volantis, through which Daenerys will be forced to pass in order to travel from Slaver's Bay to the Seven Kingdoms. The intrepid boat, full of its vibrant passengers, floats down the Rhoyne, and Jon keeps a close eye on his newest charge, putting Tyrion's mind to work and forbidding him his wine. This decision has greater consequences, however, as Tyrion soon identifies Griff and Young Griff for who they really are. As they continue on the path of the Great River, the party is set upon by stone men. Tyrion is knocked overboard by the monstrosities, left to swim and flail for his life, and pray he avoids the disease of the damned. Jon Connington comes to the imp's rescue, though, pulling the dwarf from the river with his right hand. But this action comes at a grave cost. Soon after he saves Tyrion from the stone men and the depths of the river, Jon contracts grayscale in that very same limb. He hides the illness for fear of being left behind, but suddenly, his days have become numbered. Intact but not without its scars, the Shy Maid reaches Selhorys, and Tyrion is kidnapped by the rogue and weary Jorah Mormont. Jon believes the imp has merely escaped to enjoy more drink, and so deems those who remain shall continue on without him. The rumors that Daenerys lingers in Meereen are indeed true, and so Jon hauls young Griff and the others back into the presence of the Golden Company, as the time is finally at hand to take action. The band of fighters takes heart in the presence of Aegon, as well as their former brother-in-arms, and their current leader, Harry Strickland, is already in league with Illyrio. They lament the constant shifting of plans of the men upon their cushioned seats, and so, when Aegon suggests they instead turn west and begin their own conquest on Westeros, the Golden Company embraces his plan. Jon himself agrees, and pride swells within him at the leader Aegon has become. Surely when Daenerys hears tell of another Targaryen who yet lives, she will join him in toppling what remains of the usurper's forces. But in the back of Jon's mind, the reminder of his grayscale lingers, and the hope of seeing Aegon crowned with his own eyes grows dimmer every day. Still, with the Golden Company behind him, Jon sails through the stormy seas to eventually land on the eastern coast of Westeros. And though his band of gilded fighters numbers far fewer than before, they retake Griffin's Roost for the lord who has seen his home only through dreams for so many years. Jon realizes with relief that he will not become a Kinslayer this day, as his cousin Ronald is dead, and the heir apparent to the Roost, Red Ronnet, is away, and instead reminisces about Rhaegar, the war, and his humiliation at Robert Baratheon's hand upon taking back his seat. Jon arrests his family that remains at Griffin's Roost, and though he attempts to befriend them, they are only hostile toward him. Instead, he seeks allies for Aegon elsewhere, and determines the royal family of Dorne will surely be their greatest ally of all. He prepares to inform Prince Doran that Aegon lives, but keeps it at the forefront of his mind that the boy must be kept unmarried in order to wed Daenerys when she eventually emigrates from Slaver's Bay. They need more support, however, and marriage is an essential cog in the machine of wartime alliance. Jon refuses to marry himself away either, however, as his secret grayscale ticks down like a clock toward his nearing death. Soon, Aegon himself reaches the shores of Westeros, and the pair of Griff and Young Griff plot his ascension. They agree that Storm's End must be taken, though Aegon is only content with action if he may lead from the front. Grudgingly, Jon agrees. For the time being, however, he wishes to keep up the ruse that it is he who leads this new force on the battlefield, as a lord returned from the depths of despair, intent on reclaiming his lands. Back in King's Landing, Red Ronnet informs the small council as much, and only Sir Kevan Lannister is wise enough to see the great Jon Connington as a relevant threat. And though not confirmed, the future of Jon Connington appears intermingled with Aegon and Princess Arianne Martell, and Storm's End sits ripe for the taking in the heart of the Stormlands. But the ominous cloud of grayscale hangs over Jon's head, adding urgency to a task that was but a dream only years prior. Jon Connington is consumed by guilt. He grew up close to Prince Rhaegar, maybe closer than anyone else alive, and when the Targaryens called upon him to serve, he did not hesitate. But just because Jon Connington was young and headstrong, it did not make him wise, and a blunder at the Battle of the Bells cost him not only his dignity, but also his seat, his wealth, and his place in Westeros. Forced into exile, Jon could only watch as his beloved Rhaegar, as well as the rest of the Targaryen dynasty, were beaten and broken until they were only names to be remembered in the tales of days past. Across the narrow sea, Jon experienced the guilt of a survivor. Yet it was more than that. He did not just lament his own survival, but placed all the blame for the deaths of Rhaegar and Aerys solely on his own shoulders. For if he had prevailed at the Battle of the Bells, and ended the life of the usurper like he'd set out to do, none of the terrible events that occurred thereafter would have taken place. But alas, it was not to be so, and now Jon must live with his failure forever. The Golden Company proves an adequate respite from his sorrowful thoughts, but just as he believes he can never find redemption, Jon is presented with an opportunity to wipe away all his past transgressions. The conniving pair of Illyrio and Varys present him with Aegon, Rhaegar's son, who was said to have been killed during the sack of King's Landing, and task him with mentoring the boy and grooming him to take the Iron Throne when the time is right. And in one fell swoop, the trajectory of Jon's life shifts. No longer is there no hope in sight to make up for his failures. In front of him stands the adolescent Aegon, the embodiment of his own chance at redemption, and the avatar of the Targaryens previous. Jon could not save his greatest companion Rhaegar, but now he can honor and repay him by paving the way to the throne for young Aegon. He could not undo the mistakes he had made during Robert's rebellion, but he could bring about great victories instead of defeats by hoisting the banners of his new king. Yet, an additional complication attaches itself to Jon's life as he travels on the Rhoyne in the company of Tyrion Lannister. He is stricken by grayscale, which infects his hand and creeps up toward the rest of his body. Now, Jon has not all the time in the world, but a set scale on which to accomplish his task. His days have become numbered, and the urgency to place Aegon on the throne grows astronomically greater. Jon wishes to see Rhaegar's son seated as king before he perishes, as only then will his own redemption finally be completed. Only then will the lust to right his wrongs be satiated in his own heart. And so, with a stone hand and a troubled heart, Jon lands on the shores of his former home with his heir apparent in tow, and the chance to make everything right is laid out on a shrinking path before him. He is the living symbol of potential for vindication. The Lord of Griffin's Roost suffered not only defeat, but humiliation and banishment during Robert's rebellion. Often, while the victors of war were venerated and praised, the survivors on the opposing side were forgotten and discarded, especially in the stories. But they still existed, and their lives were just as real. Jon Connington shouldered the burden of his loss every day, and only with the revelation that Aegon, son of Rhaegar, yet lived, did his guilt cease to flow. He now had purpose once more, to install the son of his former ally on the throne. And though complicated by the contraction of grayscale, this plan gave Jon a chance where before he saw only a dark pit of despair. Though the success of his new mission was as fickle and unpredictable as any conflict in the Seven Kingdoms, Jon Connington existed as Atonement Incarnate. So, that's all for this video. Leave a comment with your thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new here, I'd love to have you. Visit my website, russellawellsauthor.com, for exclusive reviews, fiction, and more. And sign up for my mailing list for free exclusive content. The links for both are in the description below. And, like always, I will see you next time.